you tend to be attracted to great bottled designs before you even necessarily know about the bourbon itself.
Yeah.
I appreciate thought and care that goes into the design of the bottle. My question to you is, did you know when you bought it that Matthew McConaughey was involved?
I had no idea.
Welcome in. We are the Bourbon Brothers, and this is the Liquid Courage Show. We have a very special show for you tonight, but before we get into that, I want to welcome in my co-host, broadcasting deep below the frozen tundra at Heinz Field. Ken, how are you tonight?
I'm doing exceptional. Thanks for asking.
Fantastic. Now, Ken, tonight's a landmark show for us. We've made it to the finale of season 1. Ken, this is our first season finale.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. One down, 6 more to go in this series, right? It's a long road ahead of us. I believe there's like 92. We're barely scratching the surface here, but
yes, we will get to celebrate a few more season finales. That's for sure. Now, if you're new to the show, the format is simple. First, we're going to kick things off with a taste and a discussion of a spirit. It'll usually be a bourbon. It's a bourbon tonight. And we will continue to enjoy said spirit throughout the remainder of the show. As for the remainder of the show, we will focus on a specific episode of a favorite television series where we will start with the pilot and work our way through episode by episode to the series finale. Tonight, we will be discussing season 1, episode 13 of Kurt Sutter's Sons of Anarchy, titled The Revelator. For those of you that are watching the show on YouTube, I want to let you know that we published the show in 3 parts. You are currently watching part 1, which will cover the bourbon tasting, and then you can look for parts 2 and 3, where we will discuss the episode. So please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single show. Also, if you're tired of looking at our ugly mugs, or you want to be able to listen in the car or on a road trip, you can also subscribe and listen to the podcast version of the show. And you can find that at iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, and just about any other location where finer podcasts are available. Also, we want to hear from you. Send us your praise, your questions, your hate comms. Let us know how we're doing, what you like, what you dislike, and what you would like to see more of. You can leave your comments in the comment section of any video, or you can email your questions to us at ask@bourbonbros, that's BROS.TV. And as we like to say, if your question doesn't suck, we may even answer it on a future show. And with that out of the way, Ken, what do we have to enjoy with the final episode of season 1 tonight?
that's a great question, John. I think we agreed last week that we were going to crack open the Longbranch.
Yes, out of Wild Turkey Distillery.
That's right. That's right.
Now, I tried to avoid including it, but I just can't. I just can't do it. It just has to be done. All right.
All right. I knew you were going to go there. This is what we're going to be drinking right here.
Yes, and it looks like a freshie.
It is. I have not had a chance to sample this myself yet, so looking forward to it.
So it's going to be the first time for me as well. While you work on getting that safety seal unlocked and the bottle uncorked, I'll just give a quick download on the key stats. So Wild Turkey Longbranch Bourbon, it is classified as a straight bourbon. Depending on where you live, I paid, I think, about $40 for it.
It's about right.
Obviously, Wild Turkey Distillery. This is an ongoing release. 86 proof, so slightly lower than some of the 90 to 93 proof bourbons we've been having. Aged for 8 years. And Ken, I think you'll be a fan of the mash bill. 75% corn.
That's good.
13% rye, 12% malted barley.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds sweet.
So you've got a high corn. And I'll just, while you get it poured, I'll give you the quick summary. This is directly from the website. We are proud to introduce Wild Turkey Longbranch 8-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon made in small batches and refined with Texas mesquite and American oak charcoals. This unique process results in an extraordinarily balanced and smooth sipping whiskey with subtle hints of smoky sweetness.
It's great marketing.
Now, sipping whiskey, that's exactly what we'll be doing. Right? We drink it straight. And smoky sweetness. And I would say from our prior reviews, we tend to gravitate and enjoy a little bit of that char and smoke, but a little of that sweetness. So from a description standpoint, this sounds right up our alley.
It does. It does.
So should we raise a glass and give it a try?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. I definitely taste the oak, the char. Do you?
Yeah, it's got a fairly heavy amount of smoke, but I will also say, and I imagine this is due to the slightly lower proof, you don't get that gasoline burn that you normally get with that very first sip.
I was going to say, I don't feel the heat in my chest.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
It's actually, it's not as complex in terms of a flavor profile. It's fairly simple and straightforward, but there's good flavor and it's quite smooth.
Yeah. It's drinkable. It's very smooth.
I could actually see this being a good, and again, I don't mean this in any way to be negative or a knock towards Wild Turkey. This is actually a compliment. I could see this being a great starter bourbon for somebody that is wanting to start drinking or trying bourbon, sipping some bourbon straight.
Mm-hmm.
This would be a good one to start with
because it's not kicking you in the face. It's not
that's right.
Your gasoline that it's smooth, not quite as complex as you mentioned. I can see that.
But it's a whiskey. It's a whiskey. It has all the flavors of a good bourbon. And there's a lot to enjoy from a flavor profile, but yeah, it's not kicking you in the teeth.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a fairly new bourbon, but I'll give you just a little bit of history and fun facts. And since this comes out of Wild Turkey, I'll just share a little bit about Wild Turkey as well, because we've not done a whole lot from them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only other Wild Turkey bourbon we've discussed up until this point is the Russell's Reserve 10-year.
Right.
That also comes out of Wild Turkey.
Yes, I recall that.
So going all the way back to the beginning, Irish brothers John and James Rippey founded the Old Hickory Distillery in 1891. After Prohibition, the family rebuilt the distillery. And this I found interesting. They began selling the bourbon to wholesalers who would then bottle that under their own label.
Really?
So that was kind of like where Bullet Bourbon was having their bourbon made by Four Roses for a number of years, and then they would bottle it and sell it under their own brand. They were kind of doing the same thing. And so a wholesaler by the name of Austin Nichols is the one that actually started the Wild Turkey brand. And legend has it that the brand name Wild Turkey came from an executive at Austin Nichols who would bring samples of bourbon to prospective customers. And he did so on a turkey hunt way back in 1940. And it was so popular among that group that they would call and say, hey, can you get us some more of that Wild Turkey bourbon? Referring to the turkey hunt. And so that legend, if you will, led to them branding Wild Turkey as a bourbon a couple of years later in 1942. And then fast forward to 1971, and the wholesaler Austin Nichols that had been getting their bourbon from the Old Rippey family distillery bought the distillery and renamed it Wild Turkey Distillery.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Now, when they were selling the bourbon to different wholesalers, were they selling, I wonder, maybe you don't know the answer to this, but were they selling the same run and lots of like the same bourbon?
It's a great question.
So literally, I can imagine us sitting together and comparing them, and we're actually drinking the same thing.
Wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be interesting. And what it might be is you're buying barrels, and it obviously will vary from barrel to barrel. So that would be my guess, is you've got Austin Nichols coming in and basically saying, I want these barrels. So I would imagine there's going to be some subtle changes from barrel to barrel. But yeah, great question. In terms of like the recipe, the process, the aging, theoretically, that could have been the same for several brands.
Right.
Now, once they bought the distillery in 1971, it went through several ownership changes, distillery changes, and then in 2011, Wild Turkey Distillery opened its doors on Wild Turkey Hill, which is where it resides today. The thing that I found interesting, and I think we touched on this in the Russell's Reserve review, but in 1954, right, before you and I were born, Jimmy Russell started his career with Wild Turkey and basically has been there since. He's been there ever since 1954. His son now works there, and his son has been there for 36 years. Now, Ken, if we had been somewhere 36 years, we'd be thinking about retirement.
Yeah.
His dad still hasn't actually handed him over the keys. His dad's still there and showing up every day. So you've got Jimmy and Eddie with a combined total experience of over 100 years, still at Wild Turkey. And they were involved directly with Matthew McConaughey in the creation of the Longbranch bourbon we're drinking tonight.
Wow, that's a great story. Now this is a place that we need to add to our visit. You know, after the jukebox stops playing Tom Jones, we could maybe get out there and
Yes. And what I find interesting is there's a lot of people that are kind of in that. And again, I don't mean to offend anyone, but there are those bourbon snobs out there that think of Wild Turkey as being a little too commercialized, not necessarily making an excellent product. And then they look at a bourbon with Matthew McConaughey's name on it, and it screams sellout, right? Mm-hmm. And as you and I sit here and we enjoy a little bit of the Longbranch, I have to say it's better than I thought it was going to be. It's actually quite a nice sipping bourbon.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it myself.
And this was released in 2018. It's the most recent addition, as far as I know, to the Wild Turkey lineup. And it was about a 24-month collaboration between Matthew McConaughey and Eddie Russell. When they hired Matthew McConaughey, he basically came to them and said, "Hey, I don't just want to be a glorified face to an ad campaign. Like, let's do something. Let's create a product." And he actually wanted to roll up his sleeves, get involved, and that's kind of what created or led to the creation of Longbranch, which I actually appreciate. It wasn't just a money grab. He actually wanted to get involved and do something beyond just lending his name to it.
Yeah, that's great. Good for him.
So pretty cool. And I got to say, I bet you purists would think of this more highly if they didn't know it came from Wild Turkey and they didn't know Matthew McConaughey had his name against it.
Yeah, great question. I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, that could be.
Because when you just take all of that out of the equation and you just enjoy the bourbon, and again, I'm not saying that this is going to be the top 5 on my list, but if this was all that was available, I'm not sad or disappointed.
Not at all. No,
this is very drinkable.
No, it is, and the presentation's great. I love me in bottles. I love the bottle. It looks great.
Yep.
No, I'm not. This is a win for me.
So, question: I know you tend to be attracted to great bottle designs before you even necessarily know about the bourbon itself.
Yeah.
And sometimes that leads you to buying a phenomenal bourbon and you don't even realize it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're not all great, and that's okay. That's part of the process. But I agree. Like, I appreciate thought and care that goes into the design of the bottle. My question to you is, did you know when you bought it that Matthew McConaughey was involved?
I had no idea. Until I started doing some research after I was already an owner, I had no idea.
So I actually appreciate that more. You didn't buy it because of Matthew McConaughey.
No, I didn't. No, I definitely didn't.
So should we get into the mailbag?
Yeah, but before we do that, I have a couple questions because you mentioned when you were going over the flavor profile in the mash, but you mentioned that this product was aged in Texas mesquite and American oak barrels or something to that effect. I thought to be a bourbon, it had to be 100% oak barrels. Is this still a bourbon?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Help me understand that a little bit better. Because I don't know that I necessarily want mesquite in my bourbon. On my barbecue I do, but I don't know about in my bourbon.
You know what, Ken? That's a fair point. It's a fair point. And when I first saw the ad campaign and I saw them reference mesquite, I was horrified that we were going to be drinking a mesquite flavored bourbon tonight. And I'm so glad that that's not the case. And as we sit here and enjoy it, do you taste any mesquite?
I mean, not in this normal sense of what I would compare it to, like, as I mentioned,
Right.
grilling. Yeah, I don't.
Right. So they actually aged the bourbon in new charred oak barrels. So it does meet the definition of a bourbon.
Okay.
The mesquite that they reference is mesquite charcoal that they use in the filtration process.
Okay, it's later then. It's not in the barrel, so they don't.
That's
okay.
right.
It's
So
just deceiving. All right.
when they talk about charcoal filtration, most are using oak, right? Which would make sense, right? But Matthew McConaughey, being from Texas, they're using some Texas mesquite charcoal. And honestly, I don't know the chemistry behind it, and I doubt that the chemistry behind it is why they used it. Otherwise, people would be using mesquite charcoal long ago. I think this was more of a way to bring in Texas into the mix and still have it meet the definition of a bourbon. But the use of charcoal is not to add flavor. It's to enhance the flavor by filtering out the impurities that would otherwise hurt the flavor of the bourbon.
Okay, so almost like a filtration mechanism.
It is a filtration mechanism. So when you think of like charcoal filters in a Brita to purify water, they're basically doing the exact same thing. So they're pulling out a lot of those impurities so that you have essentially a better bourbon left behind. And so they're using a combination of both oak and mesquite charcoal. I believe they're using both in that filtration process. And I don't know if there's any difference between the two, but I would love to understand the chemistry around oak charcoal filtration versus mesquite charcoal filtration. But some people have said that the mesquite charcoal adds an additional nuance to that filtration process that you would not get solely from oak.
Very interesting. That's something to learn more about.
Yes. So it's interesting. You get into bourbon and you start realizing I should have paid more attention in chemistry class. I thought I'd never use it. And here we are talking about chemistry.
Wow.
Mom and Dad were right. I should have paid more attention.
Pay more attention.
All right, let's hit the mailbag before we wrap up our bourbon conversation and move on to the episode. We had a really interesting kind of back and forth on Twitter last week. And so this is not necessarily a direct question, but more of a response to a question. I had posted on social media a question of what should we review next, right? And wanting to make sure that we were getting kind of audience participation on what we were selecting to review. And Layden R responded to that question on Twitter and said all the Michter's whiskeys. Now,
Great pick.
Ken,
Great pick. Mm-hmm.
great pick. You and I are both big fans of the television show Billions.
Yes, we are.
See Michter's prominently displayed.
Product placement. Well done. Product placement.
Well done product placement. But here's the thing. Michter's whiskey chimed in and got involved in the conversation. And and not surprising, they were on board with Layden's suggestion of us reviewing all the Michter's whiskeys. So I have let Michter's know that you have only been able to find one of their whiskeys in the state of PA. And so I said they may need to help us in procuring some of the other bottles.
Right. Because I think the rye is readily available. But as you can see on the shelf behind me, I have been successful, but I had to get very creative, and I'll leave it at that, on getting it into Heinz Field. So
let's just say you had to travel outside the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I did. We'll just leave it at that.
So that all said, we are going to now do a review of Michter's because you now have a bottle and I have a bottle. We'll talk more about that at the end of the show. But I want to thank Layden for the suggestion. And hopefully, if we can grow from, what would you say we're up to now? 11 fans?
I think 12.
Oh, we're up to 12 fans? Okay.
Last I looked, yeah.
So, assuming we can, 100x that, perhaps Michter's will bless us with a few bottles of bourbon and ease both our search. Because again, Ken, you're already having to travel outside of PA.
Yeah.
And again, they could ease our wallet, and that would be very appreciative.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, the search here in PA, let's just say PA is very restrictive at what they will allow to be sold here, because of course they have to take a cut of everything, and so they regulate. Let's just say that.
Well, I think the bigger challenge we hadn't anticipated is we knew that doing the show would be expensive because we had to buy not only a bottle of bourbon every week, but because Tom Jones is playing What's New Pussycat 24 times in a row everywhere, we now have to go out and buy 2 bottles because you're across the country.
Yeah.
And then we hadn't really factored in that with 92 episodes, could you find 92 different bourbons in the state of PA? And as it sits today, it's looking like the answer is no.
Yeah, that'd be a struggle, at least here.
So that brings us to the second question in our mailbag tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Jared A. says, thanks for the bourbon reviews. I recently picked up a bottle of 1792 and Eagle Rare because of your reviews. That's
great
awesome.
selection. Great selection.
And yes, those are 2 great ones to pick up. He goes on to say, I've also been exploring and trying Scotch. Any chance you're going to do some Scotch whiskey reviews?
That's a great question. That's actually a great idea, John. I mean, I believe, as you mentioned, it's going to be very difficult to keep the pace, at least living here, it really limits the scope of what we can review. So I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I'm
all
for
what Jared
it.
is? You know what Jared is? He's a problem solver. That's what he is.
That's great. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, let's add that to. Let's start looking. Any suggestions from those listening? Please. We'll wait a little bit here, but I think we absolutely have to add that.
And here's what I would say to all of the bourbon companies out there. If you would like to not see us pivot to more Scotch, we could continue to do reviews of bourbon. You just need to start sending us bottles.
That's fine. I'll be willing to do that. So if bourbon shows up, that's what we're drinking.
Otherwise, if we have to go out and we can't find bourbon, we're going to start buying Scotch.
If we have to do it, yeah. I mean, we have to.
I like it. Thank you, Jared.
There's a lot of options there.
All right. So we'll look into some Scotch options as we continue to scour the state of PA for bourbon. Thankfully, I have a little bit of a better situation here in California, so I've not reached the end of the supply yet. But hey, if things keep burning the way they have been in California, I may find myself in the same situation. So In the meantime, thank you, Jared, for the suggestion. We'll definitely explore some scotch. And since we're now agreeing to do some scotch, if you have some suggestions on scotch that you think we should review, follow up and let us know what those are, and we'll be happy to give you our impressions. And that is going to do it for part 1. Next, we're going to get into our discussion of Sons of Anarchy, Season 1, Episode 13, the final episode of the season, titled The Revelator.
Once Revelator. Again, oh, man.
Yes, The Revelator. Remember to like and subscribe. Check out our channel for more shows. But most importantly, grab your bottle of Longbranch. You have been following along, right? You're buying the same bourbon. You're joining us, and you're pouring your own glass, right?
Come on. Right.
So top off your glass with some Longbranch and join us for part 2. It's all coming up next on the Liquid Courage Show. Stay with us.